Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about the legend of the founding of Rome. Now most civilizations do have some sort of myth or legend about how they got started, and Rome is no exception. It begins with a person named Aeneas. Now legend says that Rome was founded by two twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, who were descendants of a famous Trojan hero named Aeneas. Aeneas was a minor character in Homer's Iliad, and he was one of the few Trojans who wasn't killed in the Trojan War. So at the end of the Trojan War, around 1184 BC, Aeneas fled the city of Troy with a small group of people, and he traveled to the Italian peninsula. He settled in the area that would later become Rome. Here's a piece of artwork called Aeneas Flees Burning Troy, and you can see Aeneas there in the center picking up and taking some people with him as the city was being burned by the Greeks. So then the story continues, and several hundred years have gone by, and the time is now around 771 BC. And there are two babies, Romulus and Remus, and they were born to a woman whose name is Rhea, who was a descendant of Aeneas, this Trojan hero. But the twins' uncle, King Amulius, was afraid that the boys would be a threat to his power someday. So when they were born, he ordered that Romulus and Remus should be abandoned to die in the wilderness from exposure. However, the servant who was supposed to abandon them takes them to the Tiber River and places them in a basket instead. They float away, and they were eventually saved and raised by a she-wolf. And we can see the wolf discovering the babies in the basket in this illustration. This is a famous bronze sculpture. Again, we can see the she-wolf there nursing Romulus and Remus when they were babies. So some time goes by, and later on, the wolf ends up being killed, and the boys were raised by a childless shepherd and his wife. In some versions of the story, it's the shepherd himself who kills the wolf and then adopts the boys. Growing up, the twins are totally unaware that they are actually royalty, but eventually they do discover who they were. When Romulus and Remus grow up, they end up killing their uncle Amulius as revenge for what he had done to them and to their family. And after this, the two brothers decide to go and establish their own new city that they would rule themselves. However, the two boys argued over which of the 7 hills to build the city on. Romulus wanted to build it on one hill, and Remus wanted a different hill. In the illustration here, you can see the 7 hills of Rome, the she-wolf, Romulus and Remus, and the Tiber River. So Romulus and Remus agreed to wait for a sign from the gods. And when this sign came, each brother claimed that the sign indicated that they had been chosen by the gods. So they continued to fight each other. And finally, Romulus ends up killing his brother Remus, and thus he becomes the first king of Rome in 753 BC. Romulus named the city of Rome after himself. So at this point, it's a good time to stop and think about what connections you can see between the legend of Romulus and Remus and some other stories that you might be familiar with. So for example, in the story about Paris of Troy, Paris's mother had a dream before he was born that he would grow up to destroy the city. So when Paris was born, his father sent him away to die on a mountain, but he was rescued by a shepherd. He grew up unaware of his royal identity, but later he found out who he really was. His actions did eventually bring about the destruction of Troy during the Trojan War. Another story is the legend of Oedipus, and it was prophesied before Oedipus was born that he would grow up to kill his father and marry his mother. To avoid this, his parents sent him away to be abandoned and die, but he too was saved by a shepherd and grew up not knowing his true identity. Finally, the biblical story of Moses tells us how Moses' mother placed him in a basket and set him afloat in the Nile River to save him from being killed by the Egyptian king. He is saved and raised by the Pharaoh's daughter and went on to be a great leader of the Hebrews. So a question to ask yourself is, why do you think that these similarities might exist? These are different stories from different cultures in different time periods, but there are some similar elements in all of them. So why do you think these similar elements might exist in such different pieces of literature? Now that you know the legendary origins of Rome, let's talk for a minute about the true origins of Rome. By 800 BC, the Latins had migrated to the Italian peninsula. They settled along the Tiber River. The Roman language, which is Latin, comes from these people. So people who are Roman don't speak and write Roman, they speak and write Latin. Another group of people were the Etruscans, and they lived north of Rome and ruled much of northern and central Italy. The Romans adopted the Etruscan alphabet, engineering, the arch, and many of the Etruscan gods and goddesses. Finally, let's take a look at a map of the Italian peninsula around 750 BC. You can see here in the middle, in red, are the early Romans. They didn't control very much territory at all in the beginning. To the north of them in green are the Etruscans, to the south of them in orange, the Latins, and then you can also see quite a bit of territory on the Italian peninsula, and the island of Sicily was controlled by the Greeks. The Greeks did have colonies in this area and were the dominant civilization during this time. All right then, this concludes our video on the origins of Rome.